Hiya, this is the final video on paper 2. It's language paper 2 question 5. 40 mark questions, obviously it's worth 50% of the marks available on this paper. So you want to be spending about 45 minutes.
Okay, so what it's going to look like, you're going to be given a statement that expresses a point of view, and then you're going to be asked to respond to that statement giving your own point of view. We know that this year is going to be a magazine article, but realistically, or an article at least, but realistically, whatever they ask you to do, it is just your most formal English, and that's really what you're getting the marks for. What you write about is usually linked to the theme of the two texts that you've read for section A. So if it was about how people spend their leisure time, then you're going to have a similar theme. Some of them are more interesting than others. There's been some quite interesting statements, and there's been some less interesting statements.
And just remember, you're being marked for your English skills, so don't try and make it look like a magazine. Don't be writing it in columns or anything like that, just the text of the article.
Yeah. Most important thing to bear in mind is that your writing needs to be clear, and if it isn't, you are not going to get into those top grades where we want to be. We know that's because what English language at grade 5 or above is supposed to show is that you are able to write a document for an employer or wherever you go to work after you leave school, and that they would be able to trust that your writing is clear and that their client would be able to understand everything that you're saying, and that's sort of what that means, and therefore that's the initial judgment that the examiner will make about your work. So there's 4 levels in English language, and they will span from GCSE grade 1 to 9. Level 1 is grade 1, and up in level 4 is where grade 9 is. And the very first judgment that an examiner will make is whether or not your writing is clear. Now, fundamentally, if your writing is clear, the bottom half of the mark scheme goes away, and you will get a mark in level 3 or level 4, depending on the other skills. If your writing is unclear, even if it's got lots of nice features and some interesting words, if it isn't clear, it will get a mark in the bottom half of the mark scheme, and those top levels 3 and 4 will basically disappear. So we need to prioritise making sure our work is clear above all else before we even start to think about anything else that the examiner is looking for, because this is the first judgment and therefore the most important judgment that they're going to make.
So there's various things that can make you unclear. What do we mean by unclear? It's any part of it that makes me go, huh? Like
Good.
that.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I'm marking for my class, I'll write, huh? And in the margin, because that bit just doesn't make sense. And it's a real shame that the majority of your work can be clear, and then a paragraph or 2 paragraphs can really let you down and drag you into those lower grades. So these are things. Writing too much is a classic. I don't like to plan, I just like to start writing and get my ideas down, is incorrect way to approach this question. Don't be writing right up to the last second of the exam. Don't be thinking, oh, I did 8 pages on this writing one. If you do 8 pages, you've got more chance that you're going to be making the mistakes and being unclear, and it's more likely to be rushed. So don't write too much. Don't argue for both sides. Nobody ever wrote an article for a magazine where they argued for and against becoming vegetarian. They pick a side. That's what makes it an interesting article. You will have some long words that you think you know. Make sure that you're 100% confident about the words before you try and use them. Sometimes we try and experiment with a word. Hopefully you've experimented with your long words in your mocks and the things leading up to the exam, so you are 100% confident about using the words. I've talked a lot about rushing and not going back over and check your work. I would rather see fewer paragraphs thoroughly checked than, as I say, 8 pages. You haven't got magazine articles are not 8 pages long, so your work should not be 8 pages long.
And don't feel that you can't go back and cross things out. It absolutely doesn't matter if you look scruffy, we're not getting marks for that. Clarity is our absolute priority, so if that means you have to cross a bit out or draw an arrow for it, the examiner will go with it. Just checking your work's absolutely key. And that thing where sometimes you know what you're trying to say, but because you're doing it quickly, you've missed out a word, or you've and it doesn't make sense, that's a massive issue.
Don't change tense. This is a big one. Pick a tense and try and stay in it.
Probably past tense.
Past tense is usually best, yeah. Massive one, especially sort of middle to high ability pupils do this. Long rambling sentences. I know it's a basic, but every sentence you write should start with a capital letter, end in a full stop, and make sense on its own. Avoid fragments, which I see a lot of, but also avoid these long rambling sentences. You should try and vary your sentence structure, but just avoid these ones. If you couldn't read it out loud, it's not a valid sentence.
Okay, so what else do we get marked for? It's marked twice, technically 3 times, because the first one is for the clarity, and then for AO5, which is out of 24. So register tone and purpose matched to reader. You do that probably without really thinking about it, but it just means if they ask you to write a newspaper article, write a newspaper article, not a description. You know, think about what you're writing for and who you're writing for, but really the best thing to do is just your absolute best English at all times. Even if they tell you to write for year 11 students, you go, no, I'm using my absolute best English, no slang, no abbreviations, none of those kind of words in there. Make good vocab choices, but keep the balance between making sure I'm using words that I'm really confident with and not trying to introduce just words that I've heard that I think sound good but I'm not completely sure how to use. Use of language features. So just as when you are analysing language in section A, those language features are still absolutely appropriate to use here. So you can still be using similes, your metaphors, zoomorphism, just as much as you can use facts and statistics and lists and those kind of things. So don't feel that you've got to just stick to your non-fiction language features. You can use any that you like. Use of structural features that I'm going to touch on in a little bit. So thinking about how you structure your writing and kind of giving some thought to that before you start writing. And then lastly for AO5, discourse markers. So again, these are things that people naturally use, but they are specifically referred to in the mark scheme. So a discourse marker is words like firstly, secondly, however, on the other hand, the kind of words we typically see at the start of paragraphs, and they just make your writing feel a little bit more linked and cohesive. So yeah, use some of those in your writing too. AO6 is accurate sentence demarcation. So full stops, capital letters. If it's a question, it should be a question mark. You also get marks for using other types of punctuation. So you should be trying to use colons and semicolons, brackets, things like that. If you're not sure how to use them, use the internet because it's there. Just double check. They're not particularly difficult, but we do want that wide range of punctuation wherever possible. Varying your sentence structures, so some longer sentences and some shorter sentences. I think the ones that stand out the most are those short sentences with one piece of information, so simple sentences or maybe even one word sentences. They tend to sort of stand out in your writing, but yet keep it varied. Use the standard English, so no slang, nothing informal, this is your best English. And accurate spelling. Now if you're not a good speller, and you'll know that's you, you're not going to fix that now before the exam. So be conscious of learning a few words that you think you're likely to be able to use that are more complex spellings, and then your examiner will be able to reward you for things that you've got right, as opposed to punishing you for not being able to spell other words.
Spelling.
He doesn't like spellings.
Exam timings. You should aim to spend an hour on section A in both of the exams, leaving you with 45 minutes to complete the writing task. So use your time carefully. Allow yourself time to plan. Please, please, please spend the time planning. Write and proofread your work. There's plenty of paper for you to plan on. Examiners like to see plans. It shows that you've thought about it. It provides evidence that your work is structured, and it will prevent you writing those stupidly long 8-9 page things. Have a plan. You can always change your plan, but definitely have a plan. So around 10 minutes planning, 30 minutes writing.
The paper will remind you to do it as well. I think it's probably the only paper you'll see that will say please remember to take time to plan. So we're not saying it for that it benefits us in some way. They really do want you to plan.
When you're marking mock exams, when you see someone who's planned, you're expecting a better response, because people who do better do spend the time planning. You could plan in your own way. It could be a mind map that you then number, or you can be, I've planned with bullet points. It can be anything. Just spend the time doing your plan.
Yeah, and then about 30 minutes writing that up, and the last 5 minutes, and probably time during the writing where you're proofreading as well. You are going to aim for around 5 paragraphs, so that it doesn't have to be pages and pages. We'd prefer it not to be. So just spend some time thinking about that before you start, and then check in at the end. Plan, in terms of planning the content of your writing, because we know we're aiming for 5 paragraphs, this is the way I would plan. It's absolutely fine if you want to plan in a different way, but these are the things that I would be looking to do. So my first paragraph is going to include a hook. I'm going to look at this in a second, but it's designed to be just a little bit more interesting for the reader and sort of hook us and interest us from the get-go. Examiners get bored of reading hundreds of these, so opening in an interesting way is going to make you stand out that little bit more. Never start
with, in this article I am going to talk about.
We don't want that.
Or another one that's quite common people do is they'll respond or repeat the statement that's in the question. In response to the statement, we should all wear hats to school. I am going to argue that we should not. And forget that. Go for a hook.
Yeah. Your second paragraph is going to be your first idea. Probably your driving one. The key thing for why you feel the way that you do. Remember, we're going to not be balanced. We are absolutely getting off the fence. Even if you don't have strong feelings either way, pretend you do. Nobody will check. Then your third paragraph is going to be another linked idea, linked with those discourse markers to show how this is connected to the previous one. Paragraph 4 is either going to be a third idea or a counter argument. If you incorporate a counter argument, you've got to rubbish it. So you've got to say, others might say that hats are absolutely essential for studying at school, but I know they're wrong because, and you're just going to sort of identify how people might feel differently to you, but why they would be mistaken to do so.
It's a good point where you can add maybe a little bit of sarcasm, a little bit of humour when you rubbish their argument, that could show some crafting.
Yeah. And then lastly, you're going to write a conclusion or a summary, and you're going to link back to that first paragraph where you kind of hooked the reader. In an ideal world, that's going to help you get marks for your structure. Yeah, so as I just said, these are the things that we absolutely don't want to see in this article I'm going to write about. I'm writing this letter, I agree with the statement. That is not how articles start. You won't find one that starts in that way. So we're going to avoid that because it's boring, it's not getting you any marks, it's not moving anything forward. It's a bit of a waste of time. So more of this. So I've imagined that I've been given a statement about banning drivers, that we raise the age of driving in the country till 21. And these are my favourite ways of opening. So opening and closing with a question. It's quite an easy one, but it's nice if you can just sort of have that instead of in this article I'm going to write about. So we live in a world where an 80-year-old with dementia can drive his Range Rover, but a young healthy person can't drive a Fiat Punto. Who on earth thinks that's fair? So it's just that little bit more interesting than in this article I'm going to write about. Another one that I really like is opening and closing with a setting. I like it because I often get to use a colon as well. Picture the scene, colon. It's Monday morning, rush hour. Row upon row of cars stuck behind Grandad, travelling at 13 miles per hour in a 40 zone. Hundreds of people late for work, starting their working week, stuck in enraging traffic jams, costing the economy thousands of pounds. Get the buzz, old man. So it's a bit cheeky, but it's way more interesting than just repeating the statement. There's also a what if question. So what if instead of always vilifying the young, we gave them a chance? And then lastly, what do blah and blah have in common? What do elderly drivers and COVID have in common? They are both killers. So a bit cheeky, a bit, I'm going to say sassy. Are you happy with the word sassy?
I'm just worried that I'm an older driver.
Okay, we'll move on. But I like those openings. They are definitely hook openings as opposed to I am going to write about the statement and then writing out the statement again.
As you say, it's the sassiness. Show a bit of your personality, but do it in very correct English.
And then lastly, so structure. I like this on paper 1 question 5, and I like it on paper 2 question 5 as well, a cyclical structure, and I think it's super easy for this one. So create the cyclical structure by returning to the hook from the opening paragraph. So your last paragraph, if you opened your first paragraph with a question, then you will address that question and answer it in the final paragraph. So for example, are all young people criminals? Then you'll write your essay, and then your final line will be, are all young people criminals? Of course not. Now, it's no way in the world that the examiner is going to miss that you've done a cyclical structure, and you're just linking it back. And that works for any of the ones on the previous slide. So if you open by describing a bad setting, you could close by, if everything went your way, you describe this better setting, and this would say that the world would be better if everybody agreed with you. And that works for all of them. And it is going to get me marks. We do see that candidates who are getting the highest marks have given consideration to structure. It is one of those things that we just don't see at those lower levels. So absolutely, definitely worth thinking about, and definitely a thing to be planning before you start to write.